do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick and tell everyone who you are?
Hi, my name is Orsi, and I'm very cringed out hearing my own voice. Just so you guys know, I'm the European Fellow for SSDP. I am from Hungary, but I live in Vienna, Austria right now, but I started the SSDP Austria chapter, and most of our work, or the core of our work, is really focused on representing SSDP and the youth voice at the United Nations, because the Office of Drugs and Crimes, it's another acronym, UNODC, but we'll get to that later, is located in Vienna, Austria.
And I'm Panagiotis. I come from Greece, currently live in Vienna. I was the chapter leader of SSDP in Glasgow. Pretty much, I was studying there a master's, and I was all alone. And I was trying to figure out, apart from my studies and my readings and all that stuff, I was trying to figure out voices where I can share or debate my issues or my ideas. Well, long story short, that brought me to CND, the 61st session, where I met the crew in Austria, and I was somehow integrated. And yeah, that's pretty much what I am.
Thanks, guys. So to start things off, I'm going to pass the mic over to Orsi for a little bit to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say global drug policy, what happens at the UN, and give a couple updates from the session we were just at last week in Vienna.
Okay, so where to even begin? It's a very large, tedious process how global drug policies are made, but let's focus on CND, that Jake has already said is short for Commission on Narcotic Drugs. It is the main decision-making body of the United Nations family. They have been assigned this role by the three conventions of 61, 71, and 88, if I'm correct, yeah. So those conventions govern all of the signing member states to adhere to their national rules regarding drugs and any cross-cutting issues globally. The other agencies are the WHO, the World Health Organization, and INCB, the International Narcotics Control Board. But CND being the main decision-making body that basically decides on scheduling substances and resolutions that really affect the lives of the people. This is where we can make the biggest waves as civil society and young people in civil society. And how that works is the SSDP is a member of the Economic and Social Council, and the CND is a commission, functional commission of that council, so we are in a consultative status with this commission, which means that we can participate in any kind of incident that they allow us to participate, which is not a lot. And all of that is channeled through the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs, which is another acronym for VNGOC. And as of last year, I've been elected to serve on that board, so I'm really trying to push for more representation of young people or anyone that is in contact with drugs. What else? Before we go into what happened this year, is there anything that we should inform people about global drug policy making?
Just show of hands, so Orsi mentioned the three drug conventions. How many people are familiar with those drug conventions at all, real quick? 1961 Drug Convention, a couple people, 72, 88. So just super quick background for those of you who are not familiar with the conventions. The 1961 convention is the first international agreement at the UN level around drug control policies. There were previous agreements, many actually, which were kind of signed in 45 countries, mandating that we want to control the flow of drugs, we want to prohibit drugs. But the single convention kind of brought those all under one unified banner for the UN. And I think it's really important to note and acknowledge that this convention and all really these drug control policies at the UN level were pushed by the United States. The United States is really the driver behind global drug prohibition. The US being a country that wanted to enforce prohibition not only as a means to secure its own borders and enact harsher border security controls, but also make it easier to justify colonial actions in South America, in Latin America, in Asia, in the Pacific Islands. I think people here are probably aware of different actions that the United States takes in places like Bolivia and Colombia to eradicate crops, to do aerial flybys where they spray chemicals, to enforce prohibition on these countries. These policies are all justified and kind of enshrined in the global conventions, and that's how they are oftentimes permitted to happen. So that's important to keep in mind, and I think the last thing I'll say about it too is, until very recently, when I say recently, I mean like last 10 years or even really sooner than that, the consensus around drug prohibition as the formal framework of how the international community should approach drug policy was among the strongest consensuses you will ever find in the UN. What I mean by that is most countries agree that we should control drug policy, we should restrict them, prohibition should be the rule of the land. And that has only recently just begun to change in the last couple of years, as more and more countries have stood out and talked differently about that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So just wanted to do those things, and for those who don't know, that's sort of the framework of this that we're talking about, and that is how it was really going.
Thanks, that was a really good intro to talking about what happened this year and why 2019 was kind of a crucial date. Because the last consensus that is enshrined in the document, well, there are two. One of them was 2009 and the other one was 2016. And the 2009 political declaration has set as its goal, ultimate goal, a drug-free society. And it set itself a target date of 2019, 10 years later, which is right now. And as well, we all know that this is not an achievable goal and has not been achieved, but they themselves have data to prove that not only is it not achieved, but drug production and consumption is in its all-time high. So they were, at this year's session, they were going to evaluate what they have achieved so far and how they're proceeding beyond this target date. But then comes into the picture in 2016 when the United Nations General Assembly special session on drugs have been convened, because a bit over halfway through this target date, they realized that they're in deep shit. And then they came up with another action plan and thematic sections on how to achieve a more realistic goal that is still kind of prohibition-based, but it has a bit of more progressive language and implementing civil society input. And do you remember the 7 themes of August? I can't really recall all of them. I just know that there is one cross-cutting section that concerns youth in particular, and we have been pretty active in participating there whenever we had a chance, submitting papers, speaking up. You've probably seen pictures of us consulting them in fancy boardrooms. So this year, it's usually a 5-day ordeal, the C&D, and this year they added 2 days to it, where high-ranking cabinet members of each nation state came to make their statements and pretend that they're heading into a new era of solving the global drug problem. By the way, the global drug problem is a phrase that they use frequently, and it has never been defined ever in any document. I have researched that extensively. So they came up with a new declaration this year to mark the 10th anniversary of not achieving a drug-free society. This conversation, or this deliberation of this outcome document was chaired by Nigeria, and I happened to have a conversation with them, and they were not sure. The night before they were supposed to be done with this declaration, they were not sure it's doable. And so we had a conversation about the cracking consensus and how it's really starting to feel like there's not a unanimous agreement in how we should handle the problems or the world drug problem. So they came up with a document that is trying to, they call it a one-track approach. They're trying to consolidate these 2 approaches of 2009, that is drug-free society, in 2016 that's a bit more liberal, and you can see a clear divide in member states who lines up behind one side and lines up behind the other side, with Canada, for example, clearly being a more progressive voice with the cannabis legalization, or Uruguay. And so they came up with this document a week before the meeting has actually started. So that's just to I hope I'm making sense. I'm just trying to demonstrate that these meetings are just usually feel like it's for show. The actual work is done behind closed doors, and the actual work has nothing to do with anything that you would feel like practical outcomes. So anyway, in this document, in the spirit of keeping up the consensus, they don't really say anything. It's recognizing everybody's opinions, it's recognizing harm reduction. It doesn't say harm reduction. It's language discussions are a large thing, but so it recognizes both sides of this paradigm. What else? So there have been some interesting points that I thought to mention to you, because the statements itself and the ministerial segments were a total snooze, but there have been some controversial points that we can talk about. Maybe one of them is, we touched on before, cannabis. So the WHO has a specific body called the ECDDA.
Executive Committee on Executive Committee on Drug Dependency. Yeah. Expert Committee. Thank you, Dave Warren. Expert Committee on Drug Dependency.
So this is the expert body that is tasked with evaluating substances and then recommending them to be scheduled by the Commission. And historically, they just take these recommendations and vote whatever the WHO tells them to vote for. And with cannabis, we were expecting that process to be done before this session. So that would have been huge with all the ministers that are talking about cannabis, but for some reason that the WHO has not revealed to us, it has been postponed to a couple of weeks before the session. So going into CND, we're not even sure if there is ever going to be a talk about cannabis or scheduling cannabis. But there is a very lively, uncharacteristically lively debate about member states who don't adhere to these agreements that are the cornerstones of international drug policy framework. So there are the leading voices from Canada, Uruguay, the Netherlands, and mostly EU states who are championing the progressive voice, and the other side is Russia and their friends like Iran, Egypt, China, yeah. So there is this a divide in how do we apply drug conventions. So on one side they say that the core of these things is to keep people safe and healthy, and for that they have to rethink the things that we thought were going to keep them safe 60 years ago and then apply them nationally. And for Canada, that would look like opening the market for illegal regulation. And then for China, it would mean that executing people for suspicion of drug possession. So there is that. That was a somewhat more interesting tidbit of CND. Another interesting thing, maybe for the Americans, is that how the USA is just stirring up things with. So the chairing of the commission is changing every year, and this year it was done by Iran, and the US has been protesting that. And they have also been calling out Venezuela, which has nothing to do with our policy, it's just stealing time. Maybe we can go into that later if that's interesting for anyone. And then you've mentioned Bolivia, I think, and how the US is colonizing basically these countries through drug policy, and we have learned, so the Bolivian president has made a very amazing statement, and we've learned that the law about coca has been submitted to their court in English. So that's just, everybody was just shocked by that. And also, another interesting one is about the Philippines. I'm sure you guys are aware of the outrageous atrocities that are happening in the name of the war on drugs in the Philippines. And I mean, the statement was hilarious. They have been very poetic, very dramatic, and they have also had a stand in the entry hall of the building to demonstrate their balanced approach and effective policing of society. And there have been a protest, which I think, let's hear your let's hear your perspective first, and then I can talk about how the BNGs have seen that.
Yeah, I thank you, Orsi, for all of that. That's, obviously there's a lot that goes on here at the UN, and it's hard to summarize it all, even in like 1 hour. I really want to highlight what Orsi just said about the Philippines, because I think this really highlights the ridiculousness of what we often experience at the UN. Everyone here knows that the Philippines are conducting an extrajudicial, or conducting a campaign against people who use drugs, which has involved extrajudicial killings, thousands of people dead in the streets from police and even just other civilians going out there and being encouraged to kill others for using drugs. And here is the Philippines at the UN, at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, passing this kind of policy off as demand reduction measures. I mean, it's ridiculous for people who, for us who look at that kind of thing, to hear that they are describing their policies as demand reduction measures. It's insulting to our peers that use drugs, to ourselves as people who use drugs. And it really is infuriating to go and see that. And so, as Orsi was saying, one of the things that happened this year was a flash protest outside the booth of the Philippines, where people sort of laid down and did a quick die-in in front of the Philippines booth to protest not only their actions in their own country, but that they would come to CND and pass it off as what they're trying to pass it off as. That was very quickly shut down by UN security. Apparently there's one rule at the UN for civil society, and that is do whatever UN security says. And they were pretty harsh on all other kind of messaging and potential actions and protests throughout the rest of the week, which was unfortunate. Yeah, I guess I know that we can talk about this a little bit more if you guys have questions. I want to talk a little bit about what SSDP did at CND before passing to Panagiotis. I want to just pause real quick. I know we've given you guys a ton of information. Like I said, there's a lot to talk about. Are there any quick questions about the process of the UN, or what happened, or anything like that?
So was there no consensus then on cabinets? Was that just pushed off?
It was pushed off. The earliest that a vote will happen on rescheduling candidates will be 2020 at this point, and there's still a lot of debate to be had around that. A lot of countries accepting the recommendations that were made by the WHO, a lot of countries rejecting them, and it is probably going to be at least another year before any substantial progress is made on cannabis.
Are those available online?
Yeah, so that's a good question. If you go to the cndblog.org, yeah, talk to Orsi afterwards. We'll let you know where to find all this stuff. So any other quick questions? Awesome. Cool, so just a couple of notes about what SSDP does at these forums and at the UN in general, what we did this past week. So as Orsi said, SSDP is an ECOSOC accredited organization at the UN. We have consultative status, so we can send delegates to the CND and other major UN events that happen in Vienna, Geneva, and New York. So this year, just as in every year, we conducted a side event, which are sort of panels happening just like this over the course of CND, hosted by civil society, hosted by member states. People can come and talk about specific thematic issues. Side events are usually the best way to actually speak and have people listen to you at CND. So we were really happy to organize not one but two this year, along with our global youth allies in a global coalition which we call Paradigma. We work with other global organizations which are youth-led on drug policy in this coalition to try to influence and inject the youth voice into the UN, which if anyone here has dealt with UN policy under UNRWA before knows how difficult it is for young people to speak out at the UN in any capacity. So we're trying to promote more youth voices through this coalition. So we had two side events, one on public health and human rights basic versus the drug policy, and one on leaving no one behind when it comes to drug policy reforms. Both were excellent. One of the core things we did this year was our Latin America Global Fellow, Marissa Morales, right here, was able to make a intervention from the floor of CND during the general debate on agenda item 11, which was implementation of the ungas outcome documents. So Marissa talked about the three asks we have as the Paradigma Global Youth Coalition. She talked a little bit about the lack of youth voices at the UN, and this statement is available for you to read in both Spanish and English. on the SSDP website. If you go to sdp.org/blog, you can read it there. There's also a video posted to our Facebook page, and Marissa delivered the statement in Spanish. She did a fantastic job. Thanks, Marissa. So that's the major highlights of what we did over the past week. But a lot of what happens at CB, as Orsi mentioned, happens behind closed doors, happens sort of outside the realms of the general debates. So we had a couple of our global allies, which were lucky enough to engage with the actual country delegations, which were present there. Orsi mentioned that she talked to a member of the Nigerian delegation. One of our French and Canadian students for central drug policy was actually on the Canadian delegation this year, which was amazing. She was also on the UNODC Youth Forum. Let me take a second to talk to you about the Youth Forum. The Youth Forum is something that's organized by the UNODC, UN Office on Drugs and Crime, every year to be really just sort of a parade of young people they put in front of member states to reiterate how thankful young people around the world are for protecting them from the scourge of drugs. This is, if it sounds like I'm being sarcastic, I am. It really is just a way for the UNODC and member states to trot out young people who will reiterate their viewpoint that a drug-free society is attainable, and that's what young people want. Only the people that can get on the youth forum are usually people who have that kind of viewpoint that will say, we believe in abstinence from drugs, we believe in a drug-free world, thank you for keeping us safe from drugs. So it was a pretty big deal that we had an SSDPer from Canada on the youth forum this year. Canada being one of the more progressive countries was able to get her in there and kind of shake things up a little bit. And it's good because a lot of these young people, they got on, they're, I think the cutoff is 24, so they're, a lot of them are still in high school, younger than 18. They're still people that are good people to talk to and become friends with, and we can communicate with over the long haul about ways they can go back and transfer drug policy and bring in more youth voices from a more reformer's perspective. So Heather was able to do a lot with the Youth Forum this year. It was really cool that we had a representative on there this year, as opposed to previous years where we've been denied a seat in the Youth Forum because of our views on drug policy. So yeah, we were able to engage a lot of delegations. I would say this year we probably had more success with that than any year before, and as difficult as it is to keep engagement at the UN, every year it's you can find more ways to do so from a successful level. So if you want to, I'll say it again at the end, but if you want to learn more about what SSDP does at the UN, approach me afterwards. We have a mailing list where we send updates and everything like that. I'll talk about that at the end. I know we're trucking along with here, and I want to make sure Panagiotis has enough time to frame our discussion about civil society. I wanted to take a second real here to see if either Orsi has anything else to say, or if you guys have any other questions about what we do at the UN, about global UN policy, anything like that. Dave?
Well, just point out, there almost was a second SSDP on the Youth Forum. From SSDP Sierra Leone, there's big obstacles to getting a visa from these countries.
Yeah. Thank you so much for mentioning that, David. That is very important to note. I mentioned that we did a side event on leaving no one behind. The story is a great reason why we have that side event. Aretha Bakari Kumara is an SSDP leader from Sierra Leone who was invited to attend the youth forum, was unable to make it to CND because he wasn't able to get his visa to Austria to attend CND. He had support from the UNODC, but in order to get a visa to Austria from Sierra Leone, there's no Austrian embassy in Sierra Leone. He had to go 4 countries over to Darfur in order to go to the embassy there in order to get a visa to go to CND. So he had to pay for a flight to go to Darfur, and he had to pay for the visa application as well, which is not cheap. His flights from Freetown to Darfur got canceled at the very last minute, and the UNODC did not offer him any support to help get him there, and thus he missed his visa appointment, and thus he could not attend CND. These are the kind of obstacles that people in African countries and Central Asian countries deal with when they're coming to these international forums. It's what they deal with when they're coming here to our conference right now. We had 15 people denied visas from Africa to come here to this conference. That is I can't understand how big of an obstacle that is when we're talking about getting voices at CMD which are underrepresented. If we can't give people the ability to leave their own country to travel to these forums, then how can you possibly hope to include these voices which you claim you're trying to protect? So So yeah, so Agliata was appointed to this forum, he was not able to attend, and it is something that we need to continue to raise hell about in the future, because it is, I'm sorry for language, but it's fucked up how much we exclude people from the regions which are most affected by the war on drugs from getting a chance to decide about, global drug policy. So I think it's a good transition to Panagiotis, who's going to talk a little bit about civil society and some other things as well regarding this, and then also some other systemic issues, of course, what the war on drugs are based off of. So why don't I hand it over to him?
Thanks, Jake. Thank you, Orsi. First of all, I gotta come out. This is my first ever time to do that. So apart from practicing the consensus, you'll be hearing cracks in my voice. Having said that, I would like to share the fact that for me, UN is a big stage with many actors and a vast array of role playing. Also, what I want to come out and say is that I would rather have my notes. I'm going to stick to the notes. I mean, I know that when it comes to presentation, I'm not going to ace this bit, but it's already too complicated for me to just freestyle it. So I would like to share with you my current impressions and understanding around the matter of global drug policy and of the global health governing in general. So the main point, which pretty much answers one of the questions of our event today, as to how we maximize the impact of civil society, has to do with the fact that targeting interventions, and by interventions I mean whether this is prevention or harm reduction or however you call it, or policies, can be helpful, but it will always be limited unless we start thinking expansively and ambitiously on the structures that actually create and inform overall the policies and the debates around them. So, according to the World Bank, civil society refers to a wide array of organizations that include community groups, NGOs, labor unions, indigenous groups, charitable organizations, faith-based organizations, professional associations, and foundations. And one of the key points to this definition goes that it says that when mobilized, civil society has the power to influence, and this is important, the actions of elected policymakers and businesses. As Jake and Orsi mentioned, and as we see more and more, is that civil society, it is actually ever welcomed in policy-making fora, and in many cases, in national level, is invited to participate in the governing, and this is wonderful. It's truly wonderful. But it seems to me that the role of civil society, when it comes to opposition, is often being neglected. To mention that, in general understanding, in democratic political systems, there is a clear definition between opposition and governing. Together they strike a balance in democracy and in debate, and they synchronize, they attune the process, the political process, or at least, as I've written here, they form the pretense of such a dynamic. When I talk about opposition, I mean an investigation. I mean an antithesis, pretty much, which is a stage in a dialectic process. And from there on, you can imagine that there is the analysis, which is very important in policy, and the synthesis. And I mean, before I get too philosophical in what I'm talking about, what I'm actually talking about is all of us to start being as critical as possible to whatever we are absorbing or advocating for or against. This is my straightforward answer to maximizing our impact as individuals and pairs or as a movement. In the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about how policy is captured, the role of civil society in this trait, and yeah, as I have also noted here, to throw some mentally stimulated and aspiring mantras, so you can maybe further tweet later on.